To hike with that can be troublesome, and when you're in advanced stage, to be able to hike with that is troublesome. But let's assume that he's really fit and that's not a problem. He wanted people to hear his life story. That was his initial thing. They'll find the treasure, they'll find my body, and my biography will be there, and they'll read it. Which, really, what would happen is if you found a corpse and it had a box of treasure and a bottle of pills next to it and a book, you'll take the treasure, definitely. You may take the book. Depending on who you are, you may take some of the pills. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to treasure that book or even read it. And even if one person does read it and then just throws it away or whatever, it was a bad plan. The idea of hiding a treasure and writing your life story and including clues to find the treasure means people were going to pour over your life story. And he wrote a sequel to it as well. So I think he wanted to get a story out there. I think a lot of times when we see people do stuff like this, I think that one of the biggest fears people have is that they are forgotten, or they leave no lasting impact on the world, or any impact at all even. People don't necessarily have to think they're going to leave a lasting impact, but that they have some sort of thumbprint left on the planet. I think that's one of people's most unspoken fears. And now this guy has a legacy. Even after he dies, people are going to be talking about this treasure. I don't think it's out there. I don't think it's buried. The wife of one of the men who died searching for it, she said the same thing. She says it's a hoax. She goes, I totally believe it's a hoax. I totally believe he made it up. And I think him saying stuff like, oh, a group was within 200 feet, a group was within 500 feet. I'm curious to how he knew that. Like, were groups contacting him and saying, the last place I looked was by this bush, and he's like, like, how does he know they were so close? He doesn't go on all these expeditions with them. I think it's fake. But yeah, I think the whole thing, I don't think he buried it. I think that he is now someone that people all around the world know about. And people all around the world are reading his biography, which he admits is a little embellished, which is fine. I mean, that's a little irritating, but I think that's the least of his transgressions on this. I do not believe the Forrest Fenn treasure exists. I could be wrong. Someone could dig it up. He could finally dig it up, but I think he's just going to pass away and people will be digging up the Rocky Mountains for the next 100 years. It'll just become a legend, which is what he wanted really in the first place. So let's go ahead and move on to our last story. I wanted to go, people have asked me about, like what I personally believe and personal experiences I've had, and I'm pretty open with what I personally believe, but personal experiences I have, I'm a little more hesitant to talk about, because obviously, when you talk about stuff like this, people tend to think you're crazy, and that's fine. But when you record stuff like that, when you record these type of stories, then you're basically immortalizing your craziness. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that I have a thing, I've never been diagnosed with it, so take it with a grain of salt, but I have this thing called time dysmorphia, and what it is that I can't judge time. A day to you may feel like a day and a half to me. An hour to you may seem like 2-3 hours to me. Like, I have a really hard time judging time, and people go, oh no, it's just because you're not busy, or you need to read a book or something like that, and I'm like, no, I have to have clocks around me. I have to have measurements of time, because otherwise I have no idea how much time has passed. So, I'm saying that because I don't remember, and I've made this mistake before when talking about stories, where I'll say, yeah, I think I was 25, I think this took place in 1998, and I'm wildly off by years. So I kind of have to place it in the context of other things that were going on. I believe the stories I'm about to tell you happened around 1996. So really before a good chunk of my listenership was even born. But I was out of high school, and I was probably in my second year of college, and I was living at my grandmother's house. I would sleep in the living room. My great-grandmother was still alive at the time, Grandma McGee. I would sleep in the living room, and the house always just seemed fairly eerie. This is out in Orangevale, California. It's a suburb/rural area on the border of Sacramento. The house was always creepy. I'd heard the occasional ghost story that had happened that my grandma Miller had seen a ghost of one of her sisters in the house peeking from around the corner. Just terrifying. But anyways, I would sleep in the living room on the floor. And I don't know what started it. I don't remember how it started, but I remember one night I was getting ready to go to sleep. I wasn't asleep yet. And I'm laying down on the floor. And I'm facing down the long living room. It was kind of an interesting design of a house. It had a really long living room. And I saw in the darkness, where there was just enough light coming in from the street light or the porch light outside the kitchen window, I saw the silhouette, the pitch black silhouette of a boy I'd say was about as tall as maybe like a 8 to 10-year-old boy. I don't see the... Well, this is the weird thing. So, the way that the light was coming in was that the room was flooded with darkness, but there was just enough light filling the room to kind of make out some details of just, like the couch and, the record player and the table and stuff like that. But the boy who stood there was so black. His body, his form out into the darkness. Even though everything below the shoulders was completely covered by shadow, you could see where the fingertips ended, the shoes, the jeans. It was just void blackness. It was darker than shadow. And the second I realized what I was looking at, it ran towards me. Lightning speed. Before I could comprehend, it was within striking distance of me. Now, like I said, it was a long living room. The living room was probably about 12 to 18 feet, and it was just there on me. And I say striking distance, and that's not a figure of speech, because right when I saw how close it was, I swatted at it out of instinct, like you would swat away a bug. And I made it kind of like this weird, terrified yelp. I didn't yell, I just had this weird noise in my throat, and I'm laying down, and I just kind of swatted at it. And as my hand went through it, it tore, and little gold filaments kind of came out of the form. So it would be like if you scratched something and it just kind of shredded. I didn't feel anything, but I just saw gold filaments, like where it had torn, where almost like there was no substance to it, but once I put my hand through it, it basically tore open, and the edge of each rip had this little gold filament alongside it. I hope you get that visual, because it was quite terrifying to me. And then it just wasn't there. There's no puff of smoke. There was no blink. It was simply wasn't there anymore. Now, I didn't go back to bed. And the rest of the time that I was staying at my grandma's house, I didn't like facing that way when I slept, but I almost felt like I had to. I never saw that again. But what I started to see were the dogs. I started to see these big, black, shadow dogs. They looked more like bulls. They had the shape, not necessarily with the horns. They had these. It was one of the. I think dog is the easiest way to explain it, because the heads seemed like canines, but they had more of the like torso of like a bull-shaped creature with kind of shorter back legs. The thing with the dogs they were always flat. It was like watching a two-dimensional image walk by. I didn't see them super often in the beginning, but when I saw them, I would get the sense that they were evil, sinister. The boy was the boy, and I got more of the sense that I don't know what I really thought of that emotionally, but the dogs terrified me. And again, it was that same thing, that dark beyond dark. And I would see them, usually, they would walk along the wall, because they were flat. So if they're, and this wasn't just in my grandma's house at this point, I was seeing these other places. If the wall had like a little corner, you would watch it and it would turn that corner like a shadow just being projected on the wall and would kind of move around the room. Now, of course, at this point, I think I'm going crazy. At this point, I think I'm actually losing it. Because what rational person would see stuff like that? So, you know, and let's, in this timeline, in 1997, 1998, I wasn't smoking marijuana, I wasn't doing drugs, I wasn't drinking, but I was seeing these things. And I always were looking for ghosts, I was always investigating and being intrigued by this stuff, but there was no chemical outside to this. But I was thinking, I'm obviously going crazy, I'm seeing things, these things don't actually exist. And then I started seeing what most people know of as the Shadow Man, but I was seeing a lot of them at once. The Shadow Men phenomenon is very common. You can find a ton of articles in it. I'll try to find some. Well, I won't try to find some. I'll link some in the show notes below. The Shadow Men generally come to people when they sleep. There's one of them that is sinister. They tend to wear trench coats and they have these big top hats, and there's reports of them around the world. Now, the internet wasn't really a thing when this was going on. People had it, but it was like the the dial-up. You didn't have all these resources. Everything you wanted to learn about ghosts, you had to find in a book, hopefully, then television, and then a friend telling you a spooky story. I had not heard of the Shadow Men that I can recall before I started seeing them. What was different about the Shadow Men, though, is one, I didn't get a sense that they were evil. I got a sense that they were almost beyond that. Very advanced. I got a feeling that they were curious, maybe. But not curious like they want to communicate with me. Curious the way that I'm curious when I see a caterpillar walk across the leaf. Like the scale of intelligence was so vast between me and whatever this was that I was nothing to it. The other weird thing was that they also were darker than dark, but when I looked at them, I could feel this weird thing where my eyes and my brain wanted to put color in them. 15 color within the darkness. It's really hard to explain because I'd look at it and my eyes would perceive the blackest of black, this dark, dark form, but my mind could almost see color inside of it. And you know, I've mentioned stuff about ghosts and aliens where I go, I think it's more likely they come from another dimension. That's what this felt like. It felt like the colors that my mind was trying to perceive is something that's not perceivable in our dimension or with the limitations of our eyes. So our brain just shuts down and says it's black because it can't perceive the colors that this thing actually is. So at this point, I have two options. I'm going crazy and I'm seeing this stuff everywhere. Or this stuff is real. Now, the way I always dealt with this stuff was I need to have other people witness it with me. And I try to be, and nowadays I'm very good at this. Back then I was kind of okay with it, but I have a rule that I don't tell you what I'm seeing. I let you see it, and me see it, and I ask you what you see. If we see the same thing, it's really there. If I go, oh my god, look at an old witch is flying across the moon, and then you go, oh my god, you're right, that doesn't help me at all. If I look up, and I'll go, hey, look at that. Someone else looks up, and they're like, is that a witch flying across the moon? I'm like, mm-hmm. So I brought a bunch of friends over to my grandma's house because that was a hotbed of activity. Now, like I said, I'd seen the dogs other places and things like that. I would generally see the Shadow Men in various places, but I remember